In this video, I'm going to show you how to make realistic and stylish faux glass beads that we are going to assemble into a pair of maximalist asymmetric earrings. And this is in fact the tendency for these fall designs. So you are going to be quite on trend with this clay tutorial. Also, I included my best tips for perfect image transfer at the end of the video. In fact, this is a video that I wish I had when I started making my own beads for my bead embroidery designs, because I figured it out that by making my own beads, I would make my jewelry designs unique and memorable. For this tutorial, I'm going to use a laser printed image, but if you have any kind of transfer paper for polymer clay, this would work as well. Hi, I'm Michaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and let's dive in. You'll find the material list in the description, including a link to download this image printed on a laser printer and use it to follow along. But in the meantime, let me show you how to make beautiful faux glass beads. So I printed the image on my laser printer. I used scissors to trim off the excess paper. I've also prepared a sheet of white polymer clay passed on the setting number 4 of my Atlas pasta machine. And then I applied a generous amount of rubbing alcohol, and this is my favorite image transfer medium for laser printed images. Anyway, and then I've tapped with my fingers. And then I flipped the image and I applied it on top of the polymer clay, and I used my fingers to tap on the image, and then I just started to burnish the image into the clay. And at some point you'll notice the paper fibers coming off, and you'll just have to gently gently burnish this image into the clay. It is very important not to press too hard on the clay, because you will distort the image and the clay at the same time. You just have to gently remove the paper fibers on top, and then you can add more liquid to help with this paper fiber removal process. I prefer to use a little bit of rubbing alcohol because it's what I have handy, but of course you can use water. This is the most cost-effective solution. And then I prepared a second base with the same image transfer, because I want to make beads for earrings and I want to have a larger image transfer decorated area to play with. Next, I'm going to use round cutters in several sizes, and I'm going to cut a round element, which can be larger or smaller, and then I'm going to use larger cutters to cut like rings decorated with the image transfer. And then you just have to use your blade to remove the piece from your working table and pull these pieces apart gently. You don't want to distort the clay or the image transfer, of course. Next, I'm going to use true yellow polymer clay and gold metallic polymer clay, and I'm going to use Lietz Teardrop Blend technique to make a beautiful gradient, meaning a spinner blend. And so I rolled the yellow clay into a teardrop and the gold polymer clay into another teardrop. I put them side by side, and then I pressed the clay flat, and I pressed it enough so that it would fit through the pasta machine on the largest setting. And then I put this clay through the pasta machine 10-15 times, and I'm going to do the same with magenta polymer clay and a mix of 1 unit magenta polymer clay and 1 unit gold metallic polymer clay. And I'm going to use again the Skinner blend technique to make a beautiful Skinner blend, beautiful gradient. I will put these Skinner blends through the pasta machine on the setting number 4. So I'm using the same setting that I used for the white polymer clay, which is underneath the image transfer. And then I will just use the rigid blade and cut some strips of clay. And I've also used a small round cutter to cut a round element. And my initial idea was to use a polymer clay piece passed through the pasta machine on top of a mandala texture plate. But then this was not a very good idea, and I'll tell you later why I had problems with this idea and how to get this right instead. So we'll get to this later. Next, I'm going to use the cutout elements and the strips that I cut out from the Skinner blends to make interesting geometric elements from these pieces, alternating the image transfer with the Skinner blends. And so I cut circular elements from the image transfer. I cut a round element from the yellow to gold metallic Skinner blend that I put in the center. And in between, I just used the strips of Skinner blends. And it is very important not to leave gaps between these elements, because after baking the clay and applying resin for the glass-like effect, you will notice that the resin will get into those openings, and you will end up with a wavy look on the top of the piece. And so I assembled 3 elements, and for the third element I've used a larger round cutout piece from the image transfer, and I just wrapped a Skinner blend strip around it. And then I just used baking paper and the roller to roll this flat. And this is where you have to make sure that you don't have gaps between the elements of the pieces. And of course, you can use this technique to make plenty of beautiful and interesting beads. You can cut using cutters or cut freehand. Use your favorite method of making clay beads. And this is where I got it wrong, because for this design, you'll have to assemble the elements together, and you'll have to use parchment paper and press a lot but gently. You don't want to distort the image transfer or the pieces, but you'll have to press this to connect these elements together. So if you had a texture back, you will not have a texture back after pressing on these elements. So the best way to go about this design is to assemble these cutout elements on top of your tile. Use parchment paper, baking paper, and press them together with the roller. Press them flat with no gaps using the roller, and then use your blade to lift these pieces off, and then put them on second sheet of texture polymer plate that you can texture with your favorite texture plate, and then gently use parchment paper to press gently on these pieces to connect the 2 layers together. I wanted to make earrings, so I needed a second bead. And for the second bead, I used a tiny cutout element from the previous decorated piece with the cutout elements. And then I put the 2 circles of the image transfer, and I finished with a strip of the magenta to pinkish metallic polymer clay. Again, I used parchment paper and the roller to roll everything flat. And then I used a cutter with a triangle shape to cut out the bead shape. And when I flipped the pieces, I noticed that the texture part on the back vanished. So this was not good news. So at this point, there are two possibilities. You can texture a very thin sheet of polymer clay and put these beads on top of that texture and piece and gently press everything together, but you will have bulkier pieces, and if you want thin pieces of clay, this might not work well. And the second idea is to assemble the pieces on top of the tile and then um, put them on a sheet of textured polymer clay. And so I flipped the pieces, and I've used my custom stamp to stamp on them and leafy texture plate to texture the beads. But when I turned them, I noticed that my image transferred further onto the tiles, and it is sure that the transferred images would fade. I played a little bit with the idea. I didn't know what to do with these beautiful beads, but I decided to make a pair of asymmetric earrings. And then you just have to bake the pieces for 45 minutes in the preheated oven. I tent my pieces to protect them from direct heat, and I use parchment paper on top of the tile because I don't want to have a glass-like look on the back of the pieces. You'll have to check if you need to sand your pieces. And then I use the chrome gold metallic pen to color the margins of the piece. And I decided to use this chrome metallic pen to add interesting details on the beads. And in fact, I'm just following the lines of the pattern. These are my guiding lines to add gold accents in some areas. And I think I like these beads even more with these golden accents. And I'm happy that I did this, that I added these golden accents with this gold metallic marker, because I really like how they shine through the UV resin. And then you'll just have to let this paint dry. And we are ready for the next step of the process, which is applying UV resin for the very beautiful shine and glass-like effect. So I put my pieces on a silicone mat. I've put my gloves on, and I'm making sure that I'm working in well-ventilated areas. And then I poured a generous amount of UV resin, and I used a brush to spread the resin. And normally I would put this brush into a sealable bag and put it in a drawer. It would not sit in the light. If not, the resin would cure and you would not be able to use this brush for multiple projects. And after applying resin on the two beads, you'll have to let them sit a little bit and then look from the sides and make sure you don't have gaps, meaning you don't have areas with no resin on top. And then you just have to cure the resin for 2 consecutive minutes. I'm using a fast curing lamp, and I only need to cure this resin for 2 consecutive minutes. And then I used a hand drilling tool to poke holes in order to be able to assemble these beautiful beads into an interesting asymmetric design. And I'm poking holes from front to back, and then I will go from back to front as well. I'm going to attach jump rings, and I'm going to finish by attaching these stud earring components with those long metallic bars. And I like these stud elements because they really give a modern contemporary look to these earrings, and this is exactly what I had in mind for these asymmetrical earrings. And they are asymmetrical because one bead is, as you can see, larger than the other bead, but I wanted to play a little bit with this idea. As promised, here are my best tips for transferring laser printed images onto clay. I recommend you to use white or light colors of clay. I recommend you to use pearl clay for a shimmering effect. And my favorite transfer medium is rubbing alcohol, and I tested more media, and here's the link if you want to see my test on other transfer agents. Don't flip the clay or press it down like I did in the video. You've seen what happened when I did this. Tent the pieces while baking them to protect them from direct heat, and don't forget to apply varnish resin to protect the image transfer. Thank you for watching the tutorial. Save this inspiration for your future clay projects. And if you like this idea, here's what to watch next.